Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to broker compliance training. Today we are covering, we have kind of a short class today. We're going to cover contingency removals and request for repairs. So really quickly, some of the guidelines here. So we're doing an overview on all of the required disclosures. Okay, so today is request for repairs, contingency removals. If you can, camera on if possible. I know that Leslie, and now for one of the graduation requirements, we are taking attendance. And so knowing these specific forms are really important. So camera on, attendance, be prepared, always participate. If you have a question, or if you have anything that will benefit the group, please feel free to just come off mute and feel free to share. Ask any questions that you have, take notes. And if you would like the template of anything that we've gone over today, my email address is here at the bottom, lisa.hodge@kw.com. And I'll be happy to send me an email and ask for the forms, and I will send them directly over to you. So just be sure to ask for them right after class, and then I'll get those over to you. Okay, any questions? Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Today's somewhat of a short class because we just have the two. We have two specific forms that we're going over today, and then any additional. So if you have other questions or need clarification on additional disclosures, please feel free to ask and we can cover those at the end, time permitting. All right, so we have request for repair. So the request for repairs comes from so we're doing this as a buyer's perspective. And so you're representing the buyer, you're in contract, your offer has been accepted, you've completed all your inspections. And so typically inspections are home inspection, pest inspection, roof inspection. So those are the basic inspections that are done. And then you can order subsequent reports. And so, for example, I have a property and home inspection was done and the home inspector said, hey, it's draining very slow. You might need to get a sewer scope out here. That's my recommendation to see what's going on, because the home inspector covers the basics and then they will see if there's an electrical issue, a plumbing issue, HVAC issue, and then you can order subsequent reports. And so the request for repairs comes after you've done all of your inspections, all of your reports. Then you ask the seller to either provide a credit or remedy some of these items to fix them, repair, replace, etc. And so that's when this comes into play. I also will note, especially if it's an FHA or a VA, you definitely want to wait until the appraisal comes in as well. And so this would include and I have it right down here. It says FHA VA. You want to wait for the appraisal to come in, because if there's anything additional that appraiser calls out, you're going to want to add that to the request for repairs as well. And so I like to prepare my clients and say, look, we can send the request for repairs. There's a couple things that can happen once we send this. The seller can say, yes, we'll do everything. The seller can say, no, we'll do nothing. Or the seller can say, we'll split it in the middle. Okay, so they don't have to agree to everything. Typically, right now, what we're seeing in this market is the sellers are being more agreeable to make repairs and concessions. They don't have multiple offers or buyers lined up. And so they're willing to say, you know what, okay, we'll keep this buyer, we'll make some changes, we'll make some modifications, we'll either repair or replace something, or we'll provide a credit. Because it doesn't make sense right now in this market, a lot of times for the seller to say, hey, okay, yep, I'm going to put it back on the market, because then they're looking at another month of mortgage or 2 months, 60 days. If if the particular neighborhood that you're selling in or city that you're selling in has a 45-day on market average, then we're looking at another, 45 days plus the time it takes to close. That's another 60 days. That's another 2 months of property taxes and insurance. And if there's a mortgage, that's another 2 months of mortgage payment. And so right now, weighing the benefit and the cost analysis, sellers are willing to make a little bit more concessions. So we're seeing these requests for repairs a lot longer. you know, when the market trends, sometimes there's a you know, laundry list request for repairs, and then the market's a great market and it's a aggressive seller's market. The request for repairs are either none or very small requests, right? But now we can see the trend ticking up, and now that amount is increasing, so we're seeing the longer list of requests for repairs. And so again, you have the buyer, you've done all your inspections, all your reports, and you discuss these with your client. Say what's important to you. Or you look at the appraisal and say, okay, they're requiring these things to fix. What should we add on here? What are we looking for in here? What's important to you? Or, you know, health and safety things. I typically will let my clients know, you know, health and safety are a bigger thing, or things that are worn past repair. If they're buying a house, the seller is likely to know that, you know, if the HVAC doesn't work, right? If they're living in it, they're more likely to repair things that they know kind of needs to be fixed, right? Or if the roof's leaking, they kind of have an idea, and so they're more willing to repair things that are kind of worn beyond their life expectancy, if you will. Okay, so request for repairs, number one, or whatever request it is, the date prepared. Let's see, we'll have it from the first, whatever the contract date is dated. Property known as, we'll do 123 Main Street. Somebody give me a Sacramento zip code. No, 5. Okay. That's just a random zip code. It's not a Sacramento zip code. Okay. Okay. Buyer's name, seller's name in here, information, make sure it is correct. Okay, so options. Number one, buyer can request that seller, prior to final verification of property condition, repair or take other specified action for each item listed below. So the request for repairs could look like this. It could look like number one, home inspection 1A, garbage disposal. Oh my gosh. Okay. So it could look something like this. So say that the garbage disposal is broken. So seller to repair or replace, and then you'd put the item number per home inspection, and then you could just put a little note there. Okay. Or it could look something like this. Seller to credit buyer $5,000. Okay. You don't have to specify what it's for. You can, however, if you start, the more you elaborate on repairs or items that need to get fixed, just double check with the lender to make sure it's not going to create an issue. Because if you title will and lender will require that everything contractually is satisfied. And so seller has to abide by this, and the buyer has to abide by this, and title will ensure that every contractual item is taken care of. So if you say that these things need to be fixed and repaired and replaced, we need verification that it was in fact done. It could be an issue if you say, you know, if there's other things that you bring up that the lender will want verification on, and it could just take a little bit of extra work. And so just confirm with the lender before you write up any additional things on this request for repairs that's going to go to the lender that could potentially be an issue. So just keep that in mind. Okay. If there is section 1, so let's say that you had a termite report done and there were some section 1 items or section 2 items. So section 1 is active infestation or dry rot. So those are items that need to be taken care of immediately. I don't know if any of you are familiar, or if not, I'll give you a brief overview. So termites, they love the softwood. You'll see in the eaves, if you're doing walkthrough showing property, take a look at the eaves and you'll see if there's paint chipping and kind of chipping away and rotting. That is dry rot, and that is most likely a Section 1 item and will need to be fixed because termites love that soft wood. And so if you look and there's sprinklers that are facing the house and you see the wood, that is a Section 1 item. If it's a VA buyer, VA requires Section 1 clearance prior to closing, so they will require that there's no active infestation. So just keep that in mind, and it's kind of a good tip sometimes when you're looking at properties, especially if it's a VA buyer, and say, okay, look, there's some dry rot going on here. We're definitely going to need to have that remedied before we close. So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, so let's Section 1, buyer requests seller to pay to have Section 1 work completed, prepared by let's see. Okay, so here what we have so far, seller, we want them to fix the garbage disposal. Seller to credit buyer $5,000, and we want the Section 1 work done. Okay, we can put down here as well if there's anything, if there was a credit amount saved. I like it to be clear. So I typically will write out seller to credit buyer 5,000. You can add that in here. Typically when I'm only asking for a credit, if I'm saying buyer, we just want a $10,000 credit because of all the repairs, I'll put it in line C. Okay, so it's just a matter of preference and how you want to structure it. You can put it here, that line's there specifically. For if I'm just asking repair or replace something or seller credit, I'll put it there, and then you line this out here, any other work done. Okay. Or you can do a modification of the purchase price. I think someone asked this the last class, why would you modify the purchase price? Well, I had it done recently, buyers paying cash. And so to them, it's the same amount of cash coming in. They just wanted to lower the purchase price and made it easier. There's no lender involved. So buyer request seller modified the purchase price down to, from 875 down to 860,000. So that's an easy one you can do if it just, depending on the client. So this is a good overview of what it needs to be. But again, it's going to be dependent on the client, the overall property condition. I mean, if the property is pristine and you already got a upfront, huge, under list price, and you're getting a seller credit, this might be a little bit less aggressive. So the one I'm going to do here for the template, it's going to be a kind of in the middle area, right? It's not a crazy request for repairs where there's tons of items. It's also not, just a minimal one, but so, Section 1 credit and one of the items fixed. Okay. If there were any other items here, I almost skipped past this, so we'll do all of the reports and inspections that you want to attach to this need to be added in here. So, and let's say we did a chimney. Okay, so all the reports added in here. So buyers are required per the RPA to provide to the seller any reports on the property. We get this question a lot, and there's like a lot of pushback on this, but yes, the buyers are required to provide any reports to the seller on the property. I see both sides. Buyers say, well, wait a minute, no, we paid for all of these. And then now the seller is going to take all of my reports that I paid for and go on to the next buyer. Well, yes, I mean, it does sound a little, not fair, but it is required. Also, they are required, the seller is required, and the listing agent to see those, because we also, on the flip side, they go to show another buyer, they don't have the benefit of saying, look, we know there's termites, we don't want to see the report because we don't want to be liable. No, that's not fair either. So if there's any reports, if there's anything going on with the property, we have to send it over to the listing agent, to the listing side, and say, look, here's everything about the property. It needs a new roof. There's some termite work. There's some plumbing issues, electrical. Here you go. here's what we want. And if you don't accept our, price reduction credit, whatever, you need to disclose these to a new buyer. So you're going to run into the same issue. You're going to have the same problem with a different buyer. So, it works with both ways. But if the if the if the seller is requesting the reports and you have them, you have to provide them. It's in the contract. So that came up recently, but yes, it is required to provide everything. So attach all of the reports before you send this request for repair, list everything out that was done. Okay, if it was FHA or VA lender requires the following items to be repaired, you can add in here, if it was a VA section 1, clearance, if you wanted to. It's already somewhat implied because it is a VA, if this was a VA, so you don't have to put it in there, but you can. You could reiterate that this is because it is required by the lender. Or if it's FHA, you can put that, the seller is going to replace, there's a step that's missing and it's a health and safety issue. So FHA typically will call out any health and safety issues. So if there's anything that's hazardous or a health issue, I've had it extreme dry rot has out, and I've also had a step, right? The step was too the outside step going outside was too big, and so they had to shorten that. So that was something that they'll call out. Okay. So that was A. If buyer would pay. B, same thing here. Buyer requested seller pay for the following. You can add in wherever you see fit. This is kind of the cleanest way to do it here. Okay. Okay. You can do an expiration date if needed. It just automatically expires 5 p.m. on the third day. All right. Now, if the seller agrees, they would click there and say seller agrees to all buyer's requests. If not, they'd say partial, and then they would respond with a RRRR. So response to the request for repairs. So they could agree or not, or provide a credit. So they could do a credit. They said, no, you could fix your own garbage disposal. We're not doing any section 1 items. Seller, we're going to credit the buyer, $2,000 at close of escrow. They could respond with that amount, whatever they agree upon, whatever's fair. Okay. So I think, let's see, let me go back because I missed the, I skipped past this. So let me go back here. So the contingency removal. If you're sending this request for repair and and your contingencies are due, okay, you can mark this here that buyer removes the contingencies based on if the seller agrees to the request for repair. So this is saying, thank you, yes, as long as you make these repairs, then we'll remove all of our contingencies. So we're all good. We've done all our inspections. We've done the appraisal. Loan is good to go. Sign this. If you accept it, then we remove our contingencies. And so you can attach that there. If your contingencies aren't due, you don't necessarily need to remove your contingencies unless you're using it as a bargaining chip. So you can say, we have a few days on our contingency removal. However, we'll go ahead, we'll remove contingencies as long as you accept this request for repairs. Okay. Okay, so jumping back over here, then the seller would agree. Their response would be here. Okay, so if you had the listing, they sent a request for repairs, your seller would respond here. Okay. Or they can respond here on a different form. It's the RRRR. Okay, any questions on the request for repairs? No? Okay. All right, so our request for repairs, and then here's if we did add in that contingency, okay? You could add in that contingency and you would click here, buyer hereby removes any and all buyer contingencies. That means you've done all the investigations, everything's good, you remove any and all contingencies. Very clean way to do it, easy, clean, done, okay? So that's one way to do it. Now, go back over here. So if you have different timeframes when you wrote the offer on your contingency removals, if you had perhaps a shortened inspection period, maybe because they provided all of the reports already. So maybe they provided a home inspection, past roof inspection, so you didn't really have any additional investigation to do, and they provided all of the seller disclosures already. Maybe you had a discussion with the listing agent ahead of time and here's all the reports, and then you would have a shortened contingency period. So then you can send over contingency removal number one, and it would just be, you could just remove the investigation. Okay. So all of the investigation, which is the property investigation, you can remove. Okay. Or if it's just a loan contingency, if you had a 10-day loan contingency, you could send piece by piece if you choose, or if your contingency period per the RPA specifies. But typically what we do is send over all of them at once. Now, something common that does happen is you've completed your loan, all of our investigations, everything looks good. We looked at the prelim, everything is fine. We're just waiting on that appraisal. And maybe the appraiser is taking longer and it's taking a little bit longer and you get a notice to perform. So what you can do is send over, remove all the contingencies except for, and then you would mark their appraisal. So that is if only one item is left outstanding. So if you're like, everything is good except for appraisal, then you would mark that. And that's what I see most often, is that they're just waiting on the appraisal. Okay. Or if they're remove all contingencies except for the contingency for the close of their property that they need to sell in order to buy this. Okay. And so this would be the exceptions. If there was everything is removed except one thing, or say they're waiting on loan contingency, they had one final condition that they had to get into the underwriter before final loan approval, and they're just waiting on that. But say appraisal is good, all investigations are good, but we need another couple days to make sure that that loan contingency is in place still, you can leave that there. So this is number 3, is everything except. Okay, everything except loan, appraisal, what have you. Okay, but typically, typically it's buyer removes any and all buyer contingencies. Okay, easy, clean way to do it. Okay, let's see. Now, do you guys have any questions on this? No. Okay. Like I said, it's a short one because we just have the request for repairs, buyer contingency removal. Do you have any questions on any other reports, any other disclosures, any other questions regarding request for repairs, negotiating this, or anything outside of what we talked about today?
I have a question. Do
Sure.
you, are we supposed to fill this whole thing out? Should we have like a revision, or is it okay just to like, make a note, cross out the previous note, and then, sign and date, the new revision?
A revision and as far as terms, so if it's something that has to be agreed upon, you would use an amendment. So if it is something amending the terms of the contract, you can use an amendment. So if so say for example, they agree on the request for repairs, right? But and they've agreed on a, say, a price reduction. Okay, so they're going to reduce the price $10,000. Well, they talk to the lender and they're like, you know what? Lender actually said it's easier to do a credit. So what you can do, if you've already agreed on terms, if you're amending terms, then you would do an amendment. So the revision is in terms of the contract is considered an amendment. Do you have a example of something that you're thinking of? That way we can walk through it.
No, is that a separate form?
Yes.
Like when,
Yes.
oh, okay.
Yes. So let me see if I can pull it here.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, no problem. So I'll show you all here. Let's see. All right. So this is an amendment of existing agreement terms. So good question. All right. Oh, didn't add me. Oh, Where did it go? Okay, there we go. Okay. Okay, so if you're amending terms of the agreement, it would go here. So any changes that need to be made, maybe it's not a request for repairs, maybe you and the seller during the investigations realize that there's a roof leak, and so they are going to put on a roof. So seller to provide new roof. So this is more of request for repairs is part of the negotiation. So you're requesting that they do something, they're going to present it. So it's kind of like the offer counter offer, but during the transaction. So it's kind of that initial start. Amendment is just amending the terms of what you've already agreed upon. So you can use an amendment. Now, amendment is different than an addendum. So buyer and seller kind of have to agree on this. And so amendment accepted or not accepted, they have an option to choose to not. So this is also somewhat of a negotiation, but it's a little bit different than the request for repairs. Request for repairs is specific to the repairs. We got all the reports, inspections, appraisal, loan investigation, everything done. Now we're asking that you repair or remedy these items, right? Amendment is kind of anything that falls outside of that. Outside of that initial request for repairs. Now, amendment, not to be confused with an addendum. Addendum can also modify things, but that kind of went away, and we're using more of the amendment to the terms now. So you can also amend the terms. I had this recently. Buyer to add, let's see, Joe Smith to contract as non-borrowing party. Okay, so this is when we'll see this between going to be on the loan. Okay, so say they want to get added on, you can do an amendment for something like that. So any contract revisions would go here. But basically, to revise anything with the existing terms of the RPA, once you go into contract, those are the terms. Other than that, buyer and seller have to agree. And so when you go in a contract, the seller is agreeing to sell as is. That's it. The buyer is the only one that has any kind of an out of the contract. So they have this time frame, and that's that contingency period. Your buyer has a time frame to say, look, let me investigate, let me see if I want to move forward with it. Here's an EMD, here's my deposit. I'm interested. Holding the contract for me until I'm done with my investigations. Seller can't. So the only way that the seller can get out of the contract is if the buyer doesn't perform. So the seller is essentially saying, yes, here's all the terms. Once this contract's in place, if nothing changes, it would just close on the close of escrow date, right? So the buyer's the only one that can do any investigations to kind of amend the terms, and then the buyer and seller would both have to agree on the terms. Okay, so we covered that amendment, request for repairs, contingency removal. Any other questions? Okay, earnest money deposit, I want to touch on that a little bit because it does go in line with the contingency removal. So the earnest money deposit is the EMD where the buyer puts up front and say, look, here's our earnest money deposit. We're going to put a deposit down during our investigation period, and it'll be refundable. We'll get it back if we decide that something pops up with the property that makes it not acceptable, if it needs it needs a new foundation, if there are repairs that are beyond what we can afford. And if the seller's not willing to remedy this, then buyer can then choose to cancel. So if what happens in that request for repairs, say there's a lot of items and the buyer's like, look, this is way beyond what we thought, and we really can't afford this, and we're not signing up for this kind of deferred maintenance, and there's a lot of termite and there's roof issues, etc. This is just not going to work for us. And the seller's like, yeah, we'll just keep it, we're not going to pay that much, so too bad. If it doesn't work, then you can send a cancellation, mutually agree to not move forward. So mutual cancellation instructions on the property. And then that earnest money deposit would then be refunded to the buyer. But what that deposit is, like I was saying, the seller doesn't have a right or an exit to cancel. So It's a contract. So buyer can actually sue the seller for specific performance and make them sell the property to them if they fully performed and seller tries to back out. Sellers can't back out of the contract. So there's really the sellers are stuck and their house is off the market. So in exchange for them, putting their faith into the buyer, they want a deposit saying, okay, if you do all of these investigations, if you sign off and say that everything looks good and it's no longer contingent, then that deposit is non-refundable. So after that time period, once the buyer signs off that contingency removal, that earnest money deposit is no longer refundable and can be retained by the seller if the buyer were to breach the contract. Now, it says very clear on the instructions that we're not supposed to provide legal advice, that we cannot deem who's going to keep the deposit. However, highly advise your clients that it could be non-refundable, and it's highly likely that the seller could retain that deposit if the buyer does all their investigations, agrees to move forward, signs off their contingency removal, signs off their EMD, and then if they decide to cancel, that deposit will likely be held by the seller, and the seller will likely fight for that deposit because they're saying, hey, our house has been off the market and we have all these other buyers have passed up our house because we've been waiting for you. We've been damaged. We need to receive some of that deposit, if not all of the deposit, depending on the amount. So just make that, really clear with your buyers when they're doing their, investigations and signing off the contingency removal, that it effectively makes that deposit non-refundable. So during that contingency period, it's refundable. After that, non-refundable. Okay, earnest money, contingency removal, request for repairs, amendment of terms. Um, let's see. Anything else? If not, then we're done.